All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and the speaker series for March. And thanks for those of you who have been coming month after month. We got another exciting one. This one will be very, very interesting. We've got a career pivot, or I like to say a career blending, because she didn't just change; she actually brought IO into her previous stuff, and I'm pretty excited to hear about this. So we're going to talk about Ms. Danielle Suprick. She is a dynamic training and development leader at Golden Aluminum and a workplace engineer who is passionate about bridging the gap between engineering and industrial organizational psychology. She's got a foundation of mechanical engineering and a master's degree in IO psychology, where she offers a unique perspective on enhancing manufacturing and engineering environments. Using her innovative approach as a trainer, engineer, and educator, she empowers engineers and managers to cultivate leadership skills while equipping production personnel with the knowledge and expertise needed for their roles and future growth. So, yeah, Danielle is going to talk to us about engineering, learning and development, and IO, and how you stitch those together into some kind of cool Frankenstein monster. So, Danielle, take it away.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to actually present to you guys today. When Lee and Pam approached me about doing this, I was kind of hesitant, but I think it's a unique story to share, especially because there's a lot of people who are maybe trying to figure out their career path, or maybe they're career pivoters, or kind of like Lee had mentioned, trying to find out what do I do with my existing skill sets and my previous skill set to kind of make this great workplace environment, which we're all passionate about. So again, you probably might have joined because you're like, why is an engineer in IO psychology? But my hope is to kind of guide you through like the journey that I've taken over the last decade and a half, from engineering to sales to IO psychology, and then also share some current projects that I'm working on, because I know the biggest thing that I struggled with when I was pivoting was like, how do I apply these skills, or can somebody show me what they're actually doing? And then from there, we'll do a reflective exercise, and hopefully it might help you identify your unique skill sets that you can actually take into a job interview. Or I know like I was taking a Venn diagram into interviews with me to actually explain my pivot to people, because I'm a very visual person. But without further ado, we'll just kind of start from the beginning. So I actually graduated my undergrad in mechanical engineering. My dad's an engineer, my brother's an engineer, a lot of our family friends are engineers. So it's just kind of assumed that I was going to go down this path. So one of my first jobs out of engineering school was actually at an engineering consulting firm. I did a lot of work with nuclear power plants. Um, in this phase of life, I really, I guess, kind of perfected the skill of technical problem solving. I was having to do a lot of calculations on like loads and systems and modifications, so looking at blueprints and everything. And then the next phase of my career ended up going into more of like a manufacturing setting and sales and application engineering. Um, so I remember when I decided to go from the engineering consulting firm to this other company, the VP of sales was like, this job is very much like the TV show, How Things Are Made. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that or not, but it's very true. My dad used to watch it all the time. Um, it's every time I walk through a manufacturing facility, I get so excited to see everything that's going on. But that kind of started me along my path into manufacturing. From there, I learned a lot of different things with that job because I was an applications engineer for that company. I was using different formats to collect data and information. So very similar to kind of like a task analysis or a needs analysis. I was already doing that in engineering, not realizing that I was kind of already starting to use the skill sets there. Um, but I would help spec in products for different manufacturers or system integrators, to be able to do the application that they wanted to do. Um, so with that, I also gave a lot of technical presentations. At the time, I probably wasn't the best, not knowing what I know now. And it was kind of a top-down approach to presenting information, but I perfected it along the way. But one picture, I actually had the opportunity to do a technical presentation with a bunch of engineers at Disney World. They're called the Imagineers. But I think that was kind of one of the highlights of that role for me, was going there and doing that. Um, and then fast forwarding, I still continue to do a lot of classes, build my skill set, because I thought I was going to stay in engineering, but it just didn't quite feel right. Like there was something that was missing, or I wasn't quite aligned with my path. But I loved all the experience that I got from this because, like I said, it was the technical problem solving skills. It was understanding processes, not only like what I'm seeing right in front of me, but also understanding what's happening upstream and then what's happening downstream. And through that, like I said, a lot of data analytics, system thinking, manufacturing knowledge, which gave me like the business acumen to be able to talk to people. But in one of my roles, we actually ended up going through a course, it's called solution-based selling. And that really helped me understand the importance of asking the right questions and understanding people's motivations for buying. And it really shifted my perception from this used car salesman mentality to more of a solution-based provider. And again, that's kind of what we do in IO psychology today. We're providing solutions in the current environment with all the data and everything that we collect. So again, acquiring all these skills um, pretty early on in my career without ever realizing that is something that I was going to be applying into IO psychology. The next step of my phase, I actually went from applications engineering into sales. I had moved out to Denver, just needed a change in pace and life and everything, and originally got hired as a pre-sales engineer and then ended up transitioning to account manager. But within my 4.5 years, 5 years of this role, it taught me a lot about like the people side of things and the selling and the relationship building. Because sales is really all about relationships and understanding the stakeholders and what their needs are. Again, back to IO psychology and understanding customer needs or your internal customers. But it helped me understand stakeholders as well and who you need to get involved in various processes and their importance in the process and the things that matter to them to be able to understand the whole picture. Um, so the other thing too, this also helped me build internal relationships because again, you're part of a company or organization that it's just not a one person show. You have to rely on people internally. So again, a lot of relationship building, not only externally, but internally within the organization. Another skill set that I developed during this time was business development. Like I mentioned, I was an account manager. So I had pretty much like a list of accounts that I need to call on, maintain that relationship, figure out what their needs are and how we could provide them. But I was also having to hunt for new customers and understand their needs and their motivations for either buying our products or even switching from the competition. So I was still doing a lot of sales. I was still using a lot of my engineering background too. I was doing it to identify applications, understand the equipment and how our equipment would integrate into theirs, talking with a lot of engineers. So again, a lot of technical acumen that I was having to be a part of, but it really helped me understand there's more to this environment than the technical aspect. And unfortunately, engineers aren't really given these soft skills that you really need in order to be able to talk to customers. So I think that was a very unique position that I was given, and I appreciate having that opportunity to do so. But along with all of this, I was having a lot of discussions all the way from maintenance managers to plant managers to CEOs to IT managers, again, understanding all the stakeholders and what their involvement in that selection process was. So it truly was solution-based selling. It wasn't that used car salesman mentality. Um, and then another skill set that I developed along the way was negotiation and persuasion, which so again, you're going to have to do a lot in IO psychology. So it's understanding that win-win mentality of what does the customer or that individual really need and how can I help give that to them. One of the important things I kind of learned in this whole sales process that I even use today, especially with IO psychology, whenever I would go in and provide information to a customer and we'd have conversations, I was always curious about the questions that they would ask me. And I would always follow up, well, why do you ask? And this actually helped me kind of dig a little bit deeper to understand people's thought process and really understand like what their problem or their pain point was in order to make sure that I was tailoring my response more effectively. So it also made people feel heard and understood. And with those extra context clues, I was able to address those concerns or maybe those emotions that they had in order to provide that solution. But these questions also help me understand patterns, motivations, paint the bigger picture. And again, it's something that I still use today in my current role. So all of these things, again, I kind of felt like I was misaligned with my career path, if you will. And I started kind of looking around our current organization and questioning what made some salespeople really good and others were just kind of mediocre at getting by. And I kept coming back to emotional intelligence. So that kind of started my path into IO psychology. I did a lot of informal interviews. I connected with people on LinkedIn. We started chatting. And it wasn't actually until I started having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she's like, everything that you're describing sounds like IO psychology. And I was like, what is this? I've never heard of it before. So this is only like about 3, 4 years ago that I'm discovering what IO psychology is. So clearly they might be a branding issue there. But the more that I did research and understood what it is that IO practitioners and psychologists actually do, I was like, this is really what I want to do. I want to help bridge this gap between the technical aspect and the people aspect. So I decided that I was going to go back to grad school. I actually did this with a full-time job, and my insane brain said that I could take on a part-time job as well. But I knew, like I said, it was something that I was wanting to do. So during that time that I was going to school, I kept trying to figure out, well, how am I going to apply everything that I'm learning in the program and everything? And again, it's really hard because a lot of people don't know what IO psychology is, but I kind of started thinking outside the box when I was going through my program. So I remember there was actually one multicultural psychology class that I had. Um, that as I was going through it at the time, I overheard a lot of people internally within my organization talking about this one individual. And they kept saying, she's an engineer. We're having a difficult time communicating with her and everything. And it wasn't until that class that I was like, maybe it is a personality thing, but maybe it's also a cultural thing because she's actually from Germany. So I took this information that I was learning in IO psychology and I took it back to my boss, who was her direct report as well. And he was very open to the idea of actually being able to have a conversation. But I did a cross-cultural comparison for him, explaining like this is how Germans might end up kind of going through their process, or they're very problem focused. Where in America, we're just kind of more casually talking around the subject and trying to come up with the solution. But after I ended up providing that to him, he was like, this is pretty much spot on. And he was able to take some of the coaching suggestions that I have and actually improve that relationship a little bit better. The other thing that I was kind of trying to do and apply these skill sets during that time, part of the meetup group here in Denver, where we've got over 4,800 members, not all of them active, but it's still a lot going on. So all these leadership concepts and communications, I was applying also into that group too. So as you kind of think about your journey and as you're pivoting of like, how can I apply these skills? It might be in those kind of oddball places where you can apply them or even start having conversations. But once I started acquiring these, I even started applying them to how I was showing up in the workplace because, again, I was doing a lot of sales. So I redesigned a lot of my technical presentation. I ended up including additional training material to understand like the customer needs or how they could actually use the equipment. There was actually one time where I had a customer setting up the equipment and there's a human interface or HMI screen, and I remember taking a video and writing down step by step so that next time they decided that they wanted to use the equipment or needed to make any modifications, it was something that I was able to send back to them and they kind of had that information ready to go. And then the other thing that I kind of did during this time, I was doing a lot of leadership development presentations. So connected with a guy that I was networking with on LinkedIn, and he asked me to come into California State University and share some tools on emotional intelligence. So there's a lot of things that you can currently do as you're like maybe in your current grad program, or maybe you're finished and you're trying to figure out what next. I think it's the out of the box thinking and applying that could really help. So all of these skill sets that I kind of went through as far as these pieces of my life all make up who I am today. And I keep bringing them back into my workplace environment. And I am a workplace engineer. I'm applying all these psychological and technical aspects into the field to not only understand the problem, but also to come up with solutions. And even as I was kind of going through different stages of my life, I was constantly blending all these skill sets that I had. So when I was going through grad school, I decided to actually leave my past job for various personal and professional reasons, but I was actually unemployed for 8 months, as I'm sure maybe a lot of you can relate to. I'm having a hard time finding a job, trying to figure out how to apply my skill sets. But during that time, I took the 8 months to finish my master's degree, and then also continue networking and applying for jobs. So some things for maybe you to consider as you're kind of trying to figure out these skill sets and what next. Um, I utilized a lot of my sales skills to actually help me connect with people, not only on LinkedIn, but other various platforms. So again, thinking outside that box to find jobs. A couple of things that I did was actually these pop-up IO psychology networking group. If you guys are a part of that, I highly recommend it. But met a lot of great people through there. As I mentioned before, I was doing a lot more informal interviews with people already in the industry, understanding how they got to where they were today and what their skill sets they need or how they're applying maybe some of the past skill sets they had, because I did meet a couple of career pivoters. I was doing a couple different local job seeker groups. As well as joining a bunch of different organizations, whether that's MSIOP or CBOC or ATD. There's a lot depending on which direction that you want to go. And the last thing that I did is I started actually organizing in-person meetup events. I actually drove 9 hours to Utah to meet up with Jeannie because I was so excited about meeting other IO people and just geeking out on all the nerdy stuff. But again, as you kind of think about your skill sets and trying to figure out those next steps, hopefully that might help you guys figure out some out of the box ways to start getting involved or networking with people. But I'll be honest, I actually struggled with my pivot for the longest time, that 8 months. And it wasn't actually until I found a mentor within the CBOC organization, and she really sat down with me to help me understand and become really clear about what my unique skill sets were and how I could sell them for training and development, because that's ultimately kind of what it led to and what I was passionate about. Because as you can already imagine, IO psychology is very broad and there's a lot of different avenues to it. But having her help and guidance really helped me understand um, what it was that I want to be able to clearly articulate that to people. And I think that was my biggest struggle at first. Um, and then from there, it actually ended up resulting in some pretty neat stuff. Um, I ended up telling somebody at a job seeker group, hey, I'm looking for roles in training and development, and here are the companies that I applied for. And it was actually kind of surprising because she actually had a connection at one of those companies. So she was able to reach out to her connection and get my resume to the top. And I had an interview the next day. So that's kind of the power of networking and being able to articulate like who you are, where you want to go, and how others can help. Um, Ultimately, I started my IO journey back in last April as a training and development leader within my current organization. I know that they really liked my engineering background because a lot of the leadership are engineers, but they also liked the IO psychology aspect and the human aspect into it. So again, looking at this three-circle Venn diagram, it makes me who I am. But ultimately, they gave me a month to pretty much go around, interview employees within the organization, do some observations, and really kind of understand what the pain points were. And as you can imagine, not having actually applied many of these skills fully, it was a little nerve-wracking, to be honest, because here I am trying to come up with a process that didn't exist. brand new position for them, a brand new position for me. So it took a lot of communication as far as understanding the expectations and the deliverables that they wanted from me. But again, utilizing my skills, my sales skills, was able to have those conversations. So from that month-long process, I had interviewed with upper leadership to understand what their needs were and how they align to business strategies. I met with department managers to clearly understand what their challenges were in their respective departments. And I also met with employees on the floor to understand their needs and where they thought the gaps were. Again, all of this combined and involving all these stakeholders helped paint a picture. I did some observations, not only on like the current process, but then also the tasks that they were doing, seeing how they integrated with the equipment. So again, pulling on my engineering side and understanding the equipment a little bit. Um, and it was really that relationship building. But all of this combined, I went back to the leadership team with my first initial assessment, and I was like, very clearly, there's a lack of role clarity and roles and responsibilities. And I'm unsure of like knowledge and skills that these individuals need to have as they're onboarding or moving up within the organization to be able to build out a training program. So ultimately, it came down to me telling them that I needed to do a job analysis. Back to I've never done this before. I had to do a lot more research and understanding or figuring out my process uh, for what I was going to do next. It wasn't actually until I was talking to a mentor that I connected with Dr. Scott Davis, who had mentioned this amazing book that I use still today as I'm kind of going through job analysis stuff called Applied Measurements, Methods in Industrial Psychology. And it really helped me determine parts of my process that I was going to take. But him and I really bonded over the IO psychology stuff and geeking out over the manufacturing space. And he was a great resource to be able to pull from. And then I know that he was got his own business and personal assessment, so I was able to offer my experience and suggestions in sales. So I think it was a pretty um, compatible relationship. But that's the importance of sales and networking because you might not know what they might have to offer later on in your process. So with all of this information, I ended up building out a pilot program. I told leadership I was going to do a pilot program to kind of one, figure out my process, but also figure out my change champions and start building again those internal relationships because there's a lot of people within the organization. Um, there is one other book that I wanted to drop real quick to the Measurement for Evaluation on a Shoestring is a book that I'm currently reading, but highly recommend that it's that data collection of the program as you complete it. That's another good one too. But again, with all this information, it pretty much came down to the job analysis process that I was going to take with surveys, observations, using ONET, which I'll be honest, we didn't really use ONET much in my grad program. So that was kind of a new learning thing for me too, but I still go back to it quite frequently now. Actually participating in the processes and then talking to subject matter experts, so the guys out on the floor or any of the other employees or even engineers that we have within our organization, and then also reviewing existing documents. So internally within my organizations, it's things such as work instructions and checklists and preventative maintenance stuff in order to figure out, again, the knowledge and skills somebody might need coming into that position. So some of the things that I kind of ended up using was a task inventory. As I kind of went around and did observations and identified the tasks that they would need to do on a daily basis or maybe less frequently, this was a survey process that I ended up following. I asked the employees directly, like frequency of the task or the importance or the difficulty or the relative time spent. But with this information, it helped paint a better picture of some of like the content that I might have needed to produce or the exercises that I need to have them go through. Like one of them in general was writing identification information on the internal material within the organization and really understanding, well, why are they struggling with that? Do they not understanding like our naming convention or do they not know where to find the information? So again, use this, I guess, form, if you will, to really help me kind of solidify some additional content to share with them as we were going through the onboarding process. Another tool that I used was the functional job analysis. This really helped me identify things, data, people that they might interact with, or even terminology that they might not be familiar with, because I think that's been the biggest gap that I see within manufacturing. If you haven't been in manufacturing, so some of these terms might be unfamiliar. But it also helped me identify, did we have work instructions for that task? If not, then that's something that we needed to do internally as well. Like I said, the last one I used was the ONET tasks. I actually pulled this information from ONET. I was able to find a role that was very similar, but I was able to sit down with the department manager and figure out, well, which positions use this? How often do they use it? Is this really applicable for their role? Is it not? That helped me identify, again, what content or exercises we might end up doing as we're doing the onboarding process or the additional training for them. So all those things combined, again, a lot of observations, actually performing the work instructions or doing the task with them. I don't know if you guys have actually ever been in manufacturing environments or seen it. The silver suit that I've got on right here is personal protective equipment. The company does a lot with molten metal, so safety is the #1 thing for us, as well as the understanding equipment and processes. But there's a lot of heavy duty equipment. So again, I utilize all my skill sets currently in my role as a training and development leader to help me figure out or come up with a training program. So again, that's the engineering, sales, and the IO psychology. But a lot of it's also convincing leadership to invest in training or helping the change management of like this new process that maybe employees have never considered before, or how do we get people caught up to speed? Um, but it's also encouraging them to see things in a different way or an opportunity. So I think one of the most exciting things, hope it'll pull up here, to kind of give you a taste of what the environment is. Here we go. Can you see that okay? Awesome. So this is actually our current environment in one of the departments. They're working with molten metal. And through my research, because again, I'm not a molten metal expert, but I've understood there's a lot of safety concerns as well as risks and needing to know things. But I always enjoy seeing things like this just because you never know what goes into actually producing a product. So this is where I get excited about watching the process. So I think with all these amazing things, and my love of biopsychology and engineering and sales, I think that it's important to also understand the challenges that come with it. There's a lot of navigating change management. It's communicating how you're going to be implementing the training program, or maybe explaining the process that you're going to be taking so that others are comfortable with it, but also can help support it. It's also helping reduce the resistance to a lot of longstanding habits, some skepticism about training and the effectiveness. I think at one point in my current process, I was told I'm going down a lot of rabbit holes. But I think they just didn't understand the process that I was taking or the line of questioning that I was doing in order to really understand like the root cause of the issue in order to help provide that solution for them. Another challenge with the I guess, kind of environments is communicating the why behind the training, helping stakeholders understand the purpose and the value of the training program, the challenges that you have with it. Again, utilizing a lot of my sales skills and identifying the stakeholders and what their buy into the process is and how can they help and how can I help them. So we have a bit of turnover, and there's actually like one supervisor who just recently joined on board. And as I'm going through a job analysis in that department, trying to get him involved so he can actually see the tasks that they're doing, or maybe help explain to him the process and why they're doing it, I think is important. Another challenge with the IO psychology and training would be time constraints. Uh, in grad school or even college, they don't tell you that you really have a finite window that you have to operate in because you think you've got a bunch of time or you're wanting to do your process or collect all the data as much as possible. But in reality, you've got time constraints given to you by other individuals to either create a training program or get through a job analysis. And I think part of that goes back to even education for leadership and helping them understand, hey, this is how long it takes, or maybe it does take anywhere between 36 to 40 hours to present or come up with like passive content to have for part of the training program. So I think that's important to understand. The other is pressure for a quick rollout. So again, back to the time constraints um, of actually having a program ready to go. The other one is resource limitation, another thing that they don't really talk about in grad school. Between resource limitation and small sample sizes, I know they always say try to get over hundreds or whatever that is, but I'll be honest, like my current organization, I think I only had like 20 people to pull from when I was doing the job analysis, but that's still information and insight that I didn't have before. And I think it's something to consider as you begin to step out into the real workplace and understanding what's going on. The resource limitation, besides the sample size, would also be tools and technology to help deliver the training content, or maybe it's personnel constraints. But these are all real challenges in the workplace. But again, don't quite touch about in grad school, but do impact what it is that you're trying to do. So with all of that being said and the journey and what I'm currently working on today, the next step that I hope to help encourage you guys to figure out is the Venn diagram and figuring out more like the self-reflection, critical thinking of transferable skills for maybe your next role, or maybe you're a recent graduate, or maybe you're even trying to pivot industries. So again, the objective is to help you explore and compare your skills, whether you're a recent graduate, career pivoter, or industry changer, into a Venn diagram, and then identifying the um, differences as well as the similarities that you might have. Because I actually did this, I think, pretty early on when I was going through all my interviews. Because the biggest question that I would get is, why are you switching to IO psychology? They're nothing alike. And I didn't have a great way to actually articulate that until I was able to visually show it to somebody else or even design it myself. Um, but with that visual representation, I was then actually taking that into job interviews to help describe again what it was that I was doing. But one of the things that you can use for this exercise would be like ONET to help you determine your knowledge, skills, abilities, your KSAOs, or even just doing industry research. But ultimately, on one side, you have your current state or your current knowledge and skills, or maybe it's your current role if you're not currently in IO psychology, and then maybe even like the industry that you're currently involved in. And then the other side would be, where do you want to go, or what future roles do you want to have, or what industry do you want to get into? So all of these things combined, this is what I actually came up with and what I started taking into job interviews with me and helping explain my pivot from engineering to IO psychology. Really, there's more overlap than you might think as far as process improvements, evidence-based research, the data, driven insights, and the science and the math. I just told them I'm really shifting my focus from product structures and systems to more people and organizations, but it's all the same skills that I'm bringing to the table. And once I was able to show this too and clearly articulate in my resume, like I said, it, I think, helped people clearly see what it was that I was doing and why that I'm doing it. So I don't know if this is a good time to maybe stop for a couple minutes and have people do this, or if we want to jump into questions or what.
Okay. Maybe jump into questions and people can doodle in the background and see if they've got
Okay.
questions along the way as well. I'd actually like to throw it to Krista for a moment to if she's willing to uh, join the chat for a couple minutes and explain her comment that she put in the chat about Google's new free career dreamer, because that could be an interesting add-on to what Danielle's doing. Hey, Krista, thanks for joining us.
Hi, yeah, so it's a newish, I think it was released maybe 2 weeks ago. You basically give it your job titles and then it pulls some potential job duties and you select which ones are accurate. And you can go as far back or not as far back as you want. The goal of it is really to generate some new ideas on potential paths, but it also has a really cool feature where it creates I think it was 2 to 4 sentences sort of storytelling description of your career. And I have talked to several people who have been like, this is great. This is my new LinkedIn bio, or I'm going to shorten this and put it at the top of my resume. So it's a really unique feature especially for those of us who have made some career pivots up to this point. Definitely recommend trying it out.
Awesome.
Thank you, Krista. Appreciate the share. All right, so questions from anyone?
I guess, are you guys more career pivoters, recent graduates, switching industries?
So Alexis is saying she's a recent graduate. So can you tell us more, Alexis? Do you have certain interest areas, certain areas that you think that you have more strengths than others?
Can definitely try. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. So my master's research was in feedback, so helping supervisors find some new strategies to get feedback, which I really love and was very interested in. But I think I'm pivoting a little bit more, still within IO psychology, but to employee well-being. That's, I think, a very an area I'm very passionate about. So I'm trying to figure out kind of how to apply some of my skills to that focus. And especially when my research is not in that, it's a little bit harder, I think, to translate my skills, my research beyond I could do data analytics. I can do those things in both areas in feedback research as well as employee well-being. So that's kind of where I'm at, but IO is so encompassing and it's an umbrella term. So it feels hard sometimes to kind of pick a niche I want to go into because it all sounds so interesting. It seems important to me, all of the areas. So kind of hard to pick that niche, but I'm leaning more towards employee well-being.
Nice. It's definitely a very broad field. I always thought I was going to do more of the organizational side, and it wasn't until I got into training and development that I was like, I'm an I side.
And I think that sometimes the challenge, both when you're working in IO, but also communicating, it all feels so connected to me that I'm focusing maybe more on the I side, but I think companies probably are thinking more O side. That's what's important to them. We're trying to connect them and they're all interwoven, but it's also, you can't study everything, you can't analyze everything. So you do kind of have to, I don't want to say pick a side, but kind of pick a side and still relate it for other people to show them it's all interwoven in our field and on our side.
I think the biggest thing that I've seen is like having to, I'm putting air quotes around it, sell IO psychology. When I say that, it's more of like educating them as far as like these different avenues and like the tools and the skills that you might have in order to help solve like one of those problems that they might have. So I guess like the biggest thing is asking questions, and maybe what they think is like the root cause really isn't the root cause. But again, as IOs being trained to kind of look at the bigger picture, that's where that education awareness for them comes into play.
That's definitely true. And I think even for like when I'm looking at jobs, looking at positions that have some IO tasks or responsibilities, but then a lot of maybe more admin or HR, And I wish I could talk to these companies and tell them, like, of course, yes, we can help with the admin tasks. Of course, we can also do those things, but there's so much importance to what IO does and so much importance to the skills we have and we can bring to the table outside of, oh, so IO is basically HR. And you're like, well, not exactly. I have to kind of, again, like you said, teach them and educate them of like, this is what IO could do. So it's a little be challenging, especially when you're looking for a job and you wish you could talk to the people on the other side and kind of explain and like you said, educate.
Yeah.
All right. Other comments, questions, and you can either put them in the chat or come off mute and join the conversation. Right. Go ahead, okay.
Hey Danielle, hey everybody. My name's OK. I'm a career pivoter and also a recent graduate. A career pivot from the military. I was a Marine Corps officer spent 22 years total in the Marine Corps. About 16 years as a Marine Corps officer, as an infantry officer now. Recently retired from the Marine Corps, so I'm too young to call myself a retiree. So I'm just transitioned out of the Marine Corps and then pivoting into the IO field. Finished up my grad degree, my graduate degree, my master's from Liberty University, just in December. So this was a very, very good talk. And I really appreciate it. I'll just say I'm impressed with the Venn diagrams because it's very visual. So you're able to see the transition from one to another. And just listening to you talk here, Danielle, in the last few minutes has been very, very eye-opening because it's helping me also shape what direction I want to go. You know, as an infantry officer, as a leader in the military. You know, obviously leadership and organizational leadership, change leadership are very appropriate to the skill sets I already have, and it translates into the IO field. Also, organizational development, training and learning and development as it's called as well. So a lot of those things I have very, very good experience and expertise in. And I guess what I'm almost struggling with as I'm trying to now get back into the workforce is what am I really going to kind of pick out as, hey, this is the one I want to do, or this is the direction I want to go, and this is what I can do to bring value into an organization. But you know, but listening to you here has been, I guess I don't have a question. I'm just trying to comment and reinforce the message that it was landing on an audience member like myself. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's definitely a hard process to figure out. Like I said, I was spending 8 months, I think, trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. But I know like those informational interviews are really important, or if there's something that you see somebody doing, I think like that. I've never had anybody really tell me no to an informational interview. And I always get some kind of, I call them little golden nuggets from that, to where it might be to somebody else, or like even in that conversation, I might ask them, is there anybody else that you think might be beneficial to talk to based off our conversation? Normally it does end up leading to somebody else, but I think that's like the power of the network. And I love the IO psychology community because everybody's so helpful that hopefully it will help you figure out your path a little bit better.
All right. Anything else? Questions, comments, even, you know, your own experiential stories like OK had provided for us.
Hey, I'm sorry. This is Ivana. I didn't know if I'm supposed to raise a hand or whatever.
Yeah, you're good right now, Ivana. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to be rude or anything.
No, you're good.
I did want to thank you. Sorry. It's like literally my first time here.
No worries.
And
Welcome.
thank you. I really appreciated the presentation. It was wonderful. And everything was just amazing. I did want to ask you one question, and that is if well, okay, so just to say, I got my PhD not that long ago. It's been in IO Psych. It's been about a year actually. So I'm also in executive leadership coaching. But I am trying to land that dream job. And I am more interested in organizational development and change management. Those are the two areas that I'm interested in, not only because my previous experience is in those areas, but because that is something that makes me feel alive and makes me feel like, I'm doing something and I love seeing the changes, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, because I feel like I'm so brand new in the IO, even though that it took me little over 5 years to get my PhD. So I was in the IO field, but I was literally just going through it so fast and trying to accomplish everything and, rushing through the dissertation process and everything else, that I sort of barely survived with the family and the work and everything that I needed to do, that I wasn't really nurturing any, relationships or networking or anything like that. I was pretty much off LinkedIn until like very recently. And now that I am starting to be more active, I am, growing my network, and I'm finding people to be super nice and very helpful, and I love it. But I do want to find a mentor that is, and I read this somewhere, I have no idea where, because I've been listening to podcasts, reading, just inhaling everything, like I'm drinking through a fire hydrant hose. So somewhere I saw that we should really find a mentor that is 1 or 2 steps ahead of us, not like 10 steps ahead of us. So where do I locate somebody like that? I know earlier you mentioned what was it? CBOC.
Feedback?
And yeah, I just became I believe I did become a member. Because again, everything is so brand new to me. I did because I'm attending something on Thursday that they have. But what is the best way for me to find somebody? Because you did mention that you located a good mentor, and then I'm not just that. I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different avenues depending on what you want to do. A favorite term in IO psychology, it depends. I mean, CBOC is a great resource. I know like that's where I met one mentor who helped me rewrite my resume to really like highlight all these unique skill sets that I have. Like she actually helped me bold and like it was kind of a list of skills at the top of my resume, but then I also showed like where it was applicable within my resume, and I had data to back it up. Is one avenue that you can do with CBOC. The other one, like the other mentor that I mentioned, Dr. Scott Davis, I connected with him on LinkedIn, and I just asked him to do like an informational chat. And as we were chatting, like it just ended up kind of naturally coming up of actually wanting to do like mentorship. And again, he had a lot more experience than I did in the IO psychology space. He was doing his own assessments. He was actually a professor at one of the universities. And then I know that like I was actually able to help provide insight as far as like sales and marketing and stuff like that. So I think LinkedIn is another great avenue. The other thing too, like PSYOP, I personally don't have a PSYOP network within like the Denver area. So I actually started organizing my own in-person meetup events through CBOC to help identify new people. And from that, it's just kind of like grown my network and connected me with other people. But within all of those different avenues, like having a conversation with somebody and asking them, are you willing to take on a mentor? Like, what does that look like for you? I think like understanding your role and understanding their role so that needs are met and expectations are set are important. But those are a couple of ideas, or like I even have like a job seeker group. We're currently involved in an organization called ATD, which is the Association for Talent Development, and that's more like the training and development stuff. But there's a lot of people that I've connected with in there too that have been able to help guide or mentor me in certain areas, or like currently within my organization, we're hiring for an intern. So I was able to kind of reach out to that community and say, hey, I've never done this before. Like, what would you recommend? Is there any additional insight that I might not be considering?
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
All
One
right, we've
thing
got a
to
few.
remember is
Go
that
ahead, Lee.
IO is very, very niche driven. That, you know, that there are no IO jobs and they're all IO jobs. You know, you're not going to find a job that's called IO basically outside the government. So, one thing that often gets discounted are organizations that aren't specific to IO, but are related to a niche within IO. Like Danielle talked about, what was it, ATD or whatever, or like Academy of Management, AOM, the change management organization, something, you know, there are organizations that deal with a particular interest area that isn't IO specific, but it is IO related or IO adjacent that can also help you with mentoring and can be part of your Venn diagram. And I just want to say, I had never personally, I've never even thought about taking a graphic in an interview. I love that. I absolutely love that. So, you know, putting that in the pocket. So, and the beautiful thing about IO being so broad is if you choose a niche and then you go, yeah, you know, I'm not really feeling this. That's okay. I mean, is it really a pivot if you're still in IO field? I mean, you know, you just kind of adjust fire a little bit, you know.
And where you learned in that original pivot will do you good in your next pivot, just like what Danielle's described. I started out in accounting, in manufacturing, went into veterinary medicine, went back into manufacturing and the HR, and then into IO. And I use all of my accounting stuff. I even use bits of my vet med in my IO HR type stuff. So there's always something that you bring with you, you know, your critical thinking, your problem solving, your awareness, building relationships, what have you. So none of your past experience is moot. It always has some benefit as you move forward into something new and interesting.
I guess the one thing I do want to leave you guys to, I don't know if there's more questions, but if you guys want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm on there pretty frequently, but always happy to help. Or if you decide that you want to do that Venn diagram and want to share it with somebody, I'm always excited to see those things too. I know it started out with that 2-circle Venn diagram, and then of course ended up getting into that 3-circle Venn diagram that I ended up sharing later. But I think like that's that kind of really kind of solidifies everything and all those unique skill sets that I bring, and it makes me who I am and being able to solve workplace problems.
Right. Well, any lasting comments, questions from anyone? Otherwise, we will close everything out and do look for that survey because we'd love to get your input.
Yes, thank you, Danielle. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Pam, as always, for being a partner in crime and keeping me more or less out of trouble. And thank you to all of you who came and gave up part of your evening to join us and hanging out with us for a bit. If you enjoyed this, please share the word for next month, and also you know, check out the previous speakers. We've had some fantastic speakers previously, and look for the video for this one to be posted in a few days, and share it with those in your network who can learned some great stuff from the wonderful Danielle. And with that, I bid you all a good evening and great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.